Chapter 18. As September neared its blazing end, the heat showed no sign of lessening. Now the nights were made terrible by constant electrical storms. OMalley had penned Marchant up in his allotment shed, having read of a cyclist struck down one night by the proverbial bolt from the blue. There could now be no doubt of the location of the Church of the Second Coming. Nightly its grey-faced flock stalked through the tree-lined streets of the Butts estate en route for its unhallowed portals. Father Moiety was going through agonies of self-doubt as his congregation deserted him in droves. The professor stood at his window watching them pass. He shook his head in sorrow and pulled down the blind. Many had seen the 5 red monks moving mysteriously through the midnight streets. It was rumoured that they attended at the rites of the new church. The professor felt the hairs on the nape of his neck rise when he thought of the alien monstrosities which inhabited those saintly crimson robes. He had seen them again only the night before, clustered in a swaying group outside his very garden gate, murmuring amongst themselves. A streak of lightning had illuminated them for a moment, and the professor had seen the ghastly, mottled faces, muddy, lustreless masks of horror. He had slammed shut his doors and drawn down the iron screen he had fitted for security. His house was almost in a state of siege now, and he was certain that his every move was closely observed. OMalley had been acting as messenger and delivery boy, freighting quantities of thaumaturgical books which arrived daily in wax paper packages at Norman's corner shop. The old man rarely slept now, and his hours were spent committing to memory vast passages of obscure Latin. "Every day draws us nearer," he told the struggling Irishman, as OMalley manhandled another 6 weighty tomes into the study. "You must surely have half the stock of the British Library here by now," said the perspiring John. "I have almost all that I need," the professor explained, "but I have another letter for you to post." "Talking of books," said OMalley, "I've loaned your Dymac training manual to Archroy." The professor smiled briefly. "And what became of yours?" "I never owned one," said OMalley. "It was a rumour put about by Pooley, kept us out of fights." "Well, good luck to Archroy. He has suffered more than most over this affair. I hear that as well as losing his car, his magic beans and the use of his thumb, he was also unlucky enough to have his arm broken and his head damaged by a lunatic in a Fair Isle jumper." OMalley, who now no longer adopted that particular mode of dress, nodded painfully. "I'm grateful that my companions at the Swan have been discreet over that particular matter, and I must thank my good friend Jim for the permanent loan of his second suit." The professor whistled through his teeth. "2 suits, Pooley. A man of means, indeed." OMalley sipped at his drink thoughtfully and knitted his brow. "Will all this soon be over?" he asked. "Is there any end in sight?" The professor stood at the open French windows, the setting sun casting his elongated shadow back across the room. "Great forces are at work," he said in a distant voice, "and as it is said, the wheels of God grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly small." If that was intended as an answer to OMalley's question, the Irishman failed to understand it, but as the old man's back was turned, he took advantage of the fact and poured himself another very large Scotch. "Wooza!" An enormous scream, and a startling figure clad in silk kimono, black trousers fastened tightly at the ankles, and grimy plimsolls leapt from the allotment shed, clearing the 5-foot beanpoles in a single bound, to descend with a sickening crash amongst a pile of upturned bell cloches. "Damn it!" The figure stepped from the wreckage and straightened his wig, then "Banzai!" The figure strutted forward, performed an amazing kata, and drove the fingers of his right hand back through the corrugated wall of his shed. The figure was Archroy, and he was well on the way to mastering the secrets of the legendary Count Dante. The area around his shed was a mass of tangled wreckage, the wheelbarrow was in splinters, and the watering can was an unrecognisable tangle of zinc. Archroy strode forward upon elastic limbs and sought things to destroy. The Dymac manual lay open at the marked page labelled "The Art of the Iron Hand." "Yarrow!" Archroy leapt into the air and kicked the weather vane from the top of OMalley's shed, returning to the ground upon bouncing feet. He laughed loudly, and the sound echoed over the empty dust bowl, bouncing from the mission wall and disappearing over his head in the direction of the river. "Iron Hand," he said. "I will show them." He had read the Dymac manual from cover to cover and learned it by heart. "The deadliest form of martial arts known to mankind," it said, "whose brutal tearing, rending, maiming, and mutilating techniques have for many years been known only to the high lamas of Tibet, where in the snowy wastes of the Himalayas they have perfected the hidden art of dimmer." Count Dante had scorned his sacred vow of silence, taken in the lofty halls of the Patala, never to reveal the secret science, and had brought his knowledge and skill back to the West, where for a mere $1.98 these maiming, disfiguring, and crippling techniques could be made available to the simple layman. Artroy felt an undying gratitude to the Black Mask Count, the deadliest man on earth, who must surely be living a life of fear lest the secret emissaries from Lhasa catch up with him. Artroy cupped his hand into the dark eagle's claw posture and sent it hurtling through the padlocked door of OMalley's shed. The structure burst asunder, toppling to the ground in a mass of twisted wreckage and exposing the iron frame and sit-up-and-beg handlebars of Marchant. "Luck indeed," said Artroy, sniggering mercilessly. He lifted the old black bicycle from the ruins of the allotment hut and stood it against a heap of seed boxes which had escaped his violent attentions. "You've had it coming for years," he told Marchant. The bicycle regarded him with silent contempt. "It's a river for you, my lad." Marchant's saddle squeaked nervously. "But first I'm going to punish you." Artroy gripped the handlebars and wrenched them viciously to one side. "Remember the time you tripped me up outside the Swan?" Artroy raised his left foot to a point level with his own head, spun round on his right heel, and drove it through Marchant's back wheel, bursting out a dozen spokes which spiraled into the air to fall some 20 feet away. Marchant now realised his dire predicament and began to ring his bell frantically. "Oh, no, you don't." Artroy fastened his iron grip about the offending chime and tore it free from its mountings. Crushing its thumb toggle, he flung it high over his shoulder. The bell cruised upwards into the air and fell in a looping arc directly onto the head of John OMalley, who was taking a shortcut across the allotment en route to the postbox on the corner of the Ealing Road. "Oh! Oh! Damn!" screamed OMalley, clutching at his dented skull and hopping about in pain. He levelled his boot at what he thought must surely be a meteorite, and his eyes fell upon the instantly recognisable, if somewhat battered form of his own bicycle bell. OMalley ceased his desperate hopping and cast his eyes about the allotment. It took hardly 2 seconds before his distended orbs fixed upon Artroy. The lad was carrying Marchant high and moving in the direction of the river. OMalley leapt upon his toes and legged it towards the would-be destroyer of his two-wheeled companion. "Hold up there!" he cried. "Enough of that! Let loose that velocipede!" Artroy heard the Irishman's frenzied cries and released his grip. Marchant toppled to the dust in a tangle of flailing spokes. OMalley bore down upon Artroy, his face set in grim determination, his fists clenched, and his tweed trouser-bottoms flapping about his ankles like the sails of a two-masted man-of-war. "What villainy is this?" he screamed as he drew near. Artroy turned upon him. His hands performed a set of lightning moves which were accompanied by sounds not unlike a fleet of jumbo jets taking off. "Defend yourself as best you can," said he. OMalley snatched up the broken shaft of a garden fork, and as a pupil of the legendary Count advanced upon him, a blur of whirling fists, he struck the scoundrel a thunderous blow across the top of the head. Artroy sank to his knees, covering his head and mourning piteously. OMalley raised his cudgel to finish the job. "No, no," whimpered Artroy. "Enough!" OMalley left him huddled in the fetal position and went over to survey the damage done to his trusty iron steed. "Oi, you'll pay for this," he said bitterly. "There's been a new back wheel, chainset bell, and a respray." Artroy groaned dismally. "How did you manage to fell me with that damn stick?" he asked. "I've read the manual from cover to cover." OMalley grinned. "I had a feeling that you'd not been 100% honest with me when I lent it to you, so I only gave you Volume 1. Volume 2 is dedicated to the art of defence." "You bastard." OMalley raised his stick aloft. "What'd you say?" "Nothing. And you'll pay for the restoration of my bicycle?" Yes. OMalley caught sight of the heap of splintered wood and warped iron that had once been his second home. "And my shed?" "Yes, anything you say. From the ground up, new timbers. I've always fancied a bit of a porch to sit in at the end of a summer's day." What?" OMalley wielded his cudgel menacingly. Nothing. Leave it to me." "Good then. Farewell. All my best to you, and please convey my regards to your dear wife." OMalley strode off in the direction of the postbox, leaving the master of the iron fist on the dusty ground, thrashing his arms and legs and cursing between tightly clenched teeth. The professor's letter duly dispatched, OMalley set his foot towards the Flying Swan. He looked up at the empty sky, blue as the eyes of a Dublin lass. He would really have enjoyed this unusual summer had it not been for the sinister affair he had become involved in. As he approached the Swan, he ran into Norman. It was early closing day, and like OMalley, he was thirsting for a pint of cooling large and the pleasures of the pot room. The two men entered the saloon bar and were met by a most extraordinary spectacle. Captain Carson, on whom none had laid eyes for several months, stood at the counter, evidently in a state of advanced drunkenness and looking somewhat the worse for wear. He was clad in pyjamas and dressing gown, and surrounded by what appeared to be his life's possessions in bundles and bags spread about the floor.
30 bloody years, he swore, 30 bloody years serving the troubled and down at heel, doing the work that should have won me a Nobel Prize, never a complaint, never a word said against me, and here I am, out of my year, penniless, banjoed and broken.
OMalley followed Norman to the polished counter, and the lad ordered a brace of large.
What's all this then?
OMalley whispered to the part-time barman. Neville pulled upon the pump handle.
He's got his marching orders from the mission. He's been converted into a church now, and he's no longer required.
OMalley, who felt somewhat emboldened after his recent encounter with Archroy, wondered if now might be the time to broach the subject of his wheelbarrow, but the sheer wretchedness the captain displayed drove any such thought from his mind. Who kicked him out then? The mission trust?
No, the new vicar there, some high muck-a-muck it seems.
High muck-a-muck, thought OMalley, if only they knew the truth. But the fates must surely be with him, for the captain must know a good deal about the cuckoo he had harboured within his nest.
Get him a large rum on me, said OMalley. He looks as if he needs it.
The captain took the rum in both hands and tossed it back down his open throat.
God bless you, John OMalley,
said he, wiping his mouth on his dressing-gown sleeve.
You are a good man.
I take it that the times are present against you, said John.
Against me? What you think I'm doing here in my bloody Jim Jams? Going to a fancy dress party?
It has been known.
Listen.
Captain Carson banged his empty glass upon the bar.
That bastard has driven me away from my home, evicted me with 30 years serving the troubled and down at heel, me who should have won a Nobel bloody Prize for my labours, me who...
Yes, said OMalley. I can see you're a man sorely put upon, but who has put you in this dire predicament?
That bloody Pope geezer, that's who, came into my mission as a stinking old tramp, and look what he turned out to be.
Neville pricked up his ears.
Tramp,
said the part-time barman.
When was this?
About 3 months ago. Called at my door and I extended him the hospitality that was expected of me. Should have kicked him out on his bloody ear, that's what he should have done.
Neville leant closer to the drunken sea captain.
What did he look like? He asked.
Horrible, filthy and disreputable. Evil creature, ragged as a Cairo cabbie.
And is he there now?
Neville continued.
Well...
The captain hesitated, swaying somewhat on his slippered feet, and held the bar counter for support.
You could say he is, but then again he isn't. He was little when he came.
He made a levelling gesture about chest height.
Small he was, but now huge, bloody big bastard. Bad cess upon him.
His hands soared into the air high over his head, and the eyes of the assembled company travelled with it.
"Oh, get out of here," said Neville, returning to his glass polishing. "No one can grow that big in a few months."
"I should bloody know,"
screamed the captain, shattering his glass upon the bar counter.
"I should bloody know. I fed him, cleaned him and sweat for him, treated him like some holy god all these months. He had me like a ship's rat in a trap. No one can stand against him, but now I'm out. He's kicked me out of my mission, but I'll finish him. I'll tell all I know, things he's done, things he's made me do."
Here his voice trailed off and his eyes became glazed.
"Yes," said OMalley. "What have you done?"
Captain Carson spoke not a word. Neville, who had taken shelter beneath the counter, rose again, wielding his knobkerrie.
"Get out!" he shouted. "You're barred."
The old man stood unblinking. His mouth was open as if in the formation of a word, but it was a word which never came.
"What's happened to him?" said Neville. "He's not dead, is he?"
OMalley walked slowly about the paralysed figure in the dressing-gown. He snapped his fingers and waved his hands in front of the staring eyes, but the captain could not move. He was frozen to the spot.
Those drinkers who had made vague attempts at private conversation or the perusal of the sporting press during all this now came slowly forward to view the strange tableau. Suggestions were forthcoming.
Flick your lighter, that brings him out of it. Bucket of water, that's your man. Ice cube down his neck. Make a grab at his wallet, that'll bring him round.
O'Malley held an empty wine glass to the captain's lips. He turned it between his fingers and then held it up to the light. "He stopped breathing," he said. "This man is dead."
Get him out on the
screamed Neville, climbing over the counter.
I want him a stiff in my bar.
"Quick then," said O'Malley. "Give me a hand to carry him out into the sun. Maybe we can resuscitate him." O'Malley grasped the captain under the armpits and Neville made to lift up the slippered feet. What followed was even more bizarre than what had gone before. The old man would not move. It was as if he'd been welded to the saloon bar floor. O'Malley could not shift the old and crooked shoulders an inch, and Neville let out a sudden "Oh!" and straightened up, holding his back. Several men stepped forward and attempted to shake and pull at the captain, but he would not be moved. Not 1 foot, 1 inch, 1 iota.
"Do something," said Neville in a voice of terror. "I can't have him standing there forever looking at me. He'll go off in this heat. He'll ruin my trade. It's bad luck to have a stiff in the saloon bar."
O'Malley prodded at the captain's dressing gown. "He appears to be freezing up," he said. "The material of his gown here is as stiff as a board. You can't even sway it."
"I don't care." Neville was beginning to panic. "He can't stay here. Get him out. Get him out."
O'Malley returned to the bar and took up his glass, while the crowd closed in about the captain. "That is certainly the strangest thing I've ever seen," he said. "This might make you famous." O'Malley's brain suddenly switched on. There was money in this, that was for sure. He swept back his glass of large and made for the door, but the part-time barman had anticipated him and stood, knobkerrie in hand, blocking the Irishman's exit.
"I know you don't,"
said he. O'Malley began to wheedle. "Come on, Nev," he said. "We can't do anything for him now, and we certainly can't ignore him. You can't just stick a bar cloth over his head and pretend he's a pile of cheese sandwiches."
"No publicity," said Neville, fluttering his hands. "Make me famous, this could ruin me. Frozen corpse in saloon bar scandal, I can see it all."
So could O'Malley, but he'd phrased the headline a little better.
"They'll say it was the beer, or that I poisoned him, or God knows what else. The brewery bib down on me like a ton of red flittins. This is just an excuse they need."
O'Malley shrugged. "All right," he said. "I'll say nothing, but that lot," he gestured over his shoulder, "I can't vouch for them."
"Well, don't let them out. Do something. Stop them. Get them away from him."
"Which would you like doing first?"
"The last one."
"All right." O'Malley held his chin between thumb and forefinger, thought for a moment. "Just back me up on whatever I say." He took a deep breath and strode into the midst of the throng. "Nobody touch him!" he shouted. "For God's sake, don't touch him!" The fingers which were inquisitively prodding the captain withdrew in a hurried rush. "Who's touched him?" said O'Malley in alarm. "Which one of you?" There was a lot of shuffling and murmuring.
"Well, we've all touched him," said someone in a guilty voice.
"Oh, no!" O'Malley put his hand to his forehead in a gesture of vast despair.
"What's he got?" someone said. "Out with it, O'Malley."
O'Malley supported himself on the counter and said gravely, "It's Reiki syndrome, the frozen death." Neville nodded soberly.
"I've heard of it," he said. "When I was serving in Burma, a fellow caught it. Horrible end."
Someone in the crowd, for there is always one, said,
"That's right, mate of mine had it."
O'Malley struck the counter with his fist. "What a fool," he said. "What a fool! If only I'd recognised it sooner."
"Is it contagious then?"
somebody asked. "Contagious?" O'Malley gave a stage laugh. "Contagious? Worse than the Black Death. We'll have to go into quarantine. Bar the door, Neville." Neville strode to the door and threw the brass bolts.
"How long?"
asked a patron whose wife had the dinner on. O'Malley looked at Neville. 2 days? he asked.
24 hours, said Neville. 12 if the weather keeps up.
Still, O'Malley grinned, you got to look on the bright side. He's certainly keeping the bar cool, like having the fridge door open.
Oh, good, said Neville unenthusiastically. Better put a sign up in the window. Flying Swan welcomes you, relaxing the corpse-cool atmosphere of the saloon bar.
O'Malley examined the tip of his prodding finger. It had a nasty blister on it, which the Irishman recognised as frostbite. If it gets much colder, we should be able to smash it up with a hammer and sweep the pieces into the street. The Swan's patrons, some 10 in all, who with the addition of O'Malley, Norman, who had hardly spoken a word since he entered the bar, and Neville, made up a most undesirable figure, were beginning to press themselves against the walls and into obscure corners. Most were examining their fingers and blowing upon them. Some had already begun to shiver.
O'Malley knew how easily mass hysteria can begin, and he wondered now whether he'd been wise in his yarn spinning. But what had happened to the captain? Clearly this was no natural ailment, but it had to be the work of the villain calling himself Pope Alexander VI. Obviously his power could extend itself over a considerable distance. Neville had fetched a white tablecloth and covered the captain with it. There he stood in the very middle of the bar like some dummy in a store window awaiting a change of clothes.
"If you'd let me throw him out, none of us would be in this mess," said Neville.
O'Malley rattled his glass on the bar. "I shall have to apply myself to this matter. I'm sure that in some way we can save the situation. It is a thirsty business, but—" Neville snatched away the empty glass and refilled it.
"If you can get me out of this," he said, "I might be amenable to extending some credit to you in the future."
O'Malley raised his swarthy eyebrows. "I will give this matter my undivided attention," said he, retiring to a side table. Time passed. The corpse, for all its unwelcome presence, did add a pleasantly soothing coolness to the atmosphere within the bar, not that anyone appreciated it. By closing time at 3, the bar had become perilously silent. At intervals, 1 or 2 of the quarantine patrons would come to the bar, taking great care to avoid the captain, and order the drinks which they felt were their basic human right. Neville, though a man greatly averse to after-hours drinking, could do little but accede to their demands. There were a few vain attempts to get a bit of community singing going, but Neville nipped that in the bud for fear of beat wandering policemen. 2 stalwarts began the game of darts. There had been a few movements towards the pub telephone, but Neville had vetoed the use of that instrument on the grounds that careless talk cost lives.
"Have you come up with anything lit, John?" he asked, bringing the Irishman another pint.
"I'm wondering whether we might saw out the section of floor on which he's standing and dispatch him into the cellar. At least then, if we can't get rid of him, he'll be out of the way, and if he remains preserved indefinitely in his icy room, he'll do wonders for your reserve stock." Neville shook his head.
"Absolutely not. I have no wish to confront him every time I go down to change a barrel."
"All right, it's just a suggestion." By 5 o'clock, the mob, by now extremely drunk and ravenously hungry, began to grow a little surly. There were murmurings that the whole business was a put-up job, and that O'Malley and Neville were in cahoots to con the punters out of their hard-earned pennies. In the corner, a couple of ex-Colditz types were forming an escape committee. Then, a little after 6, one of the prisoners went over the wall. He'd been out in the gents for more than his allotted 2 minutes, and when Neville went to investigate, there was no sign of him.
"Legged it across the bog roof?"
the part-time barman said, breathlessly as he returned to the saloon.
"Dropped down into the alley and away."
"Who was it?" asked O'Malley.
"Reg Watties from the Co-op."
"Don't worry then."
"Don't worry, you must be joking."
"Listen," said O'Malley, "I know his wife, and if he tries to give her any excuses about frozen corpses in the Flying Swan, he'll get very sore shrift from that good woman. It occurs to me that we might let them escape. If they talk, nobody will believe them anyway."
"They can always come back here to prove it."
"Not much chance of that there, is there?"
"So what do we do?"
"I suggest that you and I withdraw to your rooms and gave them an opportunity to make their getaways."
"I hope you know what you're doing."
Neville struck the bar counter with his knobkerry.
"O'Malley and I have some pressing business upstairs," he announced. "We will not be long, and I am putting you all on your honour not to leave."
Conversation ceased, and the eyes of the patrons flickered from O'Malley to Neville and on to the bolted door and back to Neville again.
"We swear," they said, amid a flurry of heart-crossing and scoutish saluting.
O'Malley beckoned to Norman. "You might as well come too. You overheard everything." The 3 men left the bar and trudged up the stairs to Neville's bedroom.
"So what now?"
asked the part-time barman. "We sit it out. Do you still keep that supply of scotch in your wardrobe?" Neville nodded wearily.
"You don't let much get by you, do you, John?"
Below in the saloon bar there came a sudden sound of bolts being thrown, followed by a rush of scurrying footsteps. Neville, who had brought out his bottle, replaced the cap.
"Well, we won't be needing this now, will we?"
O'Malley raised his eyebrows. "And why not?"
"Well, they've gone, haven't they?"
"Yes, so?"
"So we go down and dispose of the captain."
"Oh, and how do we do that?" Neville, who had been sitting on the edge of his bed, rose brandishing the whisky bottle.
"So it's treachery, is it, O'Malley?" he roared. "You had no intention of getting rid of him."
"Me? No." O'Malley wore a quizzical expression mingled with outraged innocence. "There's nothing we can do. He's welded to the floor in a most unmovable manner. If I was a man in a leaning towards science fiction, I would say that an alien force field surrounded him." Neville waggled his bottle at O'Malley.
"Don't give me any of that rubbish. I demand that you act now. Do something."
"If you'd give me a minute or two to explain matters, I would greatly appreciate it."
Neville took out his hunter. 2 minutes, said he, then I'll waste this bottle over your head. I deplore such wastage, said John, so I'll endeavour to speak quickly. 1 minute 53 seconds, said Neville. John composed himself and said, As we both observed what happened to the captain, I do not propose to lecture you upon the sheer inexplicable anomaly of it. It was clearly the work of no mortal man, nor was it any natural catastrophe, or at least none that I have ever heard of.
It's Reiki syndrome, said Norman.
Shut up, Norman, said Neville. It was caused, said O'Malley, I believe, to shut the captain up. He was about to spill the beans over what was going on at the mission, and so he was silenced. Neville scratched his brill-cream scalp. All right, said he, but what do we do about him? We can't let him stay there indefinitely. No, and nor can they. Now, I've listened to certain propositions put forward by Professor Slocum. Neville nodded. A good and honourable man? Exactly. And he believes that there has come amongst us of late an individual who can affect the laws of chance and probability to gain his own ends. This individual is presently ensconced in the seaman's mission and calls himself Pope Alexander VI. I believe he is to blame for what happened to the captain, and I also believe that he cannot afford to be tied into it and will therefore arrange for the disposal of the same. You went over your 2 minutes, said Neville, but if all is as you say, it would go a long way towards explaining certain matters which have been puzzling me for some months now. Have I ever spoken to you of the sixth sense? Many times, said O'Malley, many times, but if you wish to retell me, then may I suggest you do it over a glass or two of scotch? Certainly. And may I also suggest that we keep a watch on the road at all times? I'll do it, said Norman, for I have little to say or do during this entire chapter. Night fell. Almost at once, the sky became a backcloth for a spectacular pyrotechnic exhibition of lightning. The lights of the saloon bar were extinguished, and the frozen captain stood ghostly and statuesque, covered by his linen cloth. Norman stood at Neville's window, staring off down the Ealing Road, and O'Malley drained the last of the scotch into his glass. Neville held his watch up to what light there was. A bright flash of lightning illuminated the dial. It's nearly midnight, he said. How much longer? O'Malley shrugged in the darkness. The Guinness clock struck a silent 12 below in the bar, and in Neville's room Norman said suddenly, Look at there, what is it? John and Neville joined him at the window. What is it? Said Neville. I can't make it out.
Down by Jack Lane's, said Norman. You can see it coming towards us. From the direction of the river, moving silently upon its 8 wheels, came an enormous jet-black lorry. It resembled no vehicle that the three of them had ever seen, for it bore no lights, nor did its lustreless bodywork reflect the street lamps which shone to either side of it. There was no hint of a windscreen, nor cracks that might indicate doors or vents. It looked like a giant mould as it came to a standstill outside the Flying Swan. O'Malley craned his neck to look down upon it, but the overhang of the gabled roof hid the mysterious vehicle from view. The familiar creak of the saloon bar door, however, informed the 3 men that someone had entered the bar.
Here, said Neville suddenly. What are we doing? Whoever it is down there could be rifling the cash register. Go down then, said O'Malley. You tell them. The part-time barman took a step towards the door, then halted. Best leave it, eh? I think that would be for the best, said O'Malley. The saloon bar door creaked open again, and after a brief pause, Norman said from the window, He's moving off. The 3 men watched as the hellish black lorry crept out once more into the road and disappeared over the railway bridge past the football ground. Together the 3 men descended the stairs. The bar was empty, lit only by the one light from the street. The lightning had ceased its frenzied dance on the great truck's arrival, and the night had become once more clear and silent. In the centre of the floor lay the white linen tablecloth. Neville flicked on the saloon bar lights. Norman picked up the tablecloth. Holding it out before him, he suddenly gave a cry of horror and dropped it to the floor. O'Malley stooped to retrieve it and held it to the light. Impressed upon the cloth was what appeared to be some kind of negative photographic image. It was clear and brown as a sepia print, and it was the face of Captain Carson. There, said O'Malley to the part-time barman. Now you've something to hang behind your bar. The Brentford shroud.